Okay, Mayor, we're live.
We're live. Everybody ready? So good evening, everyone. This is a special meeting from the Oakland Mayor and Council and with our water professionals to talk about the notice that you received about 2 weeks ago, the status of our water system. And so this meeting is going to be conducted by The meeting is going to be conducted by our water engineer, Kevin Boswell, and Giselle Diaz. So they will be conducting the meeting and they will be the one answering all the questions. So I leave for Kevin Boswell to start.
Thank you, Mayor. My name is Kevin Boswell. I'm principal with Boswell Engineering. We are the borough's drinking water and sewer engineer, as well as the borough engineer. Tonight I'll go through a PowerPoint discussion which talks about some of the primary elements associated with a recent notice that went out regarding the violation of the recently adopted state drinking water standards that apply to a particular class of chemicals. So next slide, please. First thing is the Oakland water system. Oakland has an excellent water system. It has a total of about 72 miles of water main. It has 6 water storage tanks, 4 pumping stations, actually 4 pressure zones, which mean that between all of the differences in elevation, it's necessary to actually isolate certain areas so that their pressure is not too low or too high in some areas. And then there are 7 wells. These 7 wells are actually located at 4 separate areas. We have 1 well field with 4 wells, and then we have 3 other wells at other locations throughout the borough. Next slide, please. I just summarized some of the things you just saw in the geographic information system drawing, but there is the notice that's being published now relates to what is referred to as well 10. And well 10 is in the southern area of the borough. The borough's wells are generally located along the Ramapo River. They're very excellent producing wells. They lie within the Ramapo River aquifer. There is one that's further out along 287, that's along the Allerman Brook towards the east, but they're all generally lying within and along the river alignment. Next slide, please. In 1974, Congress passed the Safe Drinking Water Act. It's been amended in 86 and 96. And there are currently over 90 compounds that the US EPA has established standards for. And what happens is that the EPA is constantly monitoring a list of unregulated compounds. There's over 200 of them. And at 5-year intervals, they monitor all of them as they relate to any customer base of more than 10,000 customers. The borough has just under 13,000 customers, so they fall within that process whereby the EPA requires our licensed water operator to sample these wells, and then they evaluate those, determine if additional limits are appropriate. So the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection may regulate those compounds further if they so desire. But the feds actually are the ones who determine what chemicals are. I'm sorry. The feds are the ones that actually determine if they are regulated. And what's happened is that the feds have adopted certain standards that are considerably higher, or I should say, allow for a much greater concentration than the state of New Jersey has adopted. The state of New Jersey has some of the strictest regulations relating to these compounds. They're known as PFNAs, PFOS, PFOAs, and they've been used for about 70 years. They're very common in firefighting foam. They're used in such materials as Scotchgard, Teflon, dental floss, shampoo, packaging wrappers, and the idea is that they are resistant to water, grease, and they're very heat resistant as well. That's how they got into the firefighting foam. They are very widespread. They are very water soluble, and they do not break down by normal treatment methods. The borough and every other water system in New Jersey treat for other compounds, and they are generally removed through other methodologies. And these are, I guess you could call them stubborn types of chemicals to remove. Let's go to the next slide, please. As I said, these materials, they not only are in these types of chemicals, but they also stay in the stream of water systems when they go through not only just water treatment for potable water, but wastewater treatment, and they're released back into the environment. And then they work their way into the aquifer, they work their way back into reservoirs, and they come back and they keep repeating. They're very, very persistent. They're very hard to track and isolate a source. There are some times when we can, but they're very hard to isolate a source. The standards that we must have adopted in New Jersey are extremely high. Next slide, please. The PFAS compounds are regulated in parts per trillion. And to put that in perspective, that's a single drop of water in 20 Olympic swimming pools. So what we're talking about when we talk about these chemicals is 13 parts per trillion and 14 parts per trillion. That's essentially an eyedropper of these contaminants within 20 Olympic swimming pools. So that's the level of the concentrations that we refer to as the maximum contaminant level, the MCL, that we're dealing with here. When these first started to be regulated, there were only very few, less than 10 labs in the entire country that were capable of performing the tests that needed to be performed in order to meet these standards. Go ahead, next slide, please. So the maximum contaminant levels, the MCLs, were adopted over 2 cycles. PFNAs had 13 parts per trillion. That was adopted in September of 2018. The monitoring and testing went into effect in the first quarter of 2020. PFOAs and PFOSs, the legislation affecting them happened in June of 2020, and it only kicked in the first quarter of 2021. The EPA health advisory level for these exact same contaminants are different in that it's 20 parts per trillion, either individually or combined. So obviously, if you look at those three different contaminants, you add them up, you get 41, I believe, 40, excuse me. But if you add them up, if you're doing them differently and regulating them separately, it's a much higher standard. And you'll see why as we get into the particular results that came out this year. It's again, New Jersey's the 5th highest in the nation. It's one of only 10 states that have taken these regulatory standards higher. And the test is based on a running annual average, RAA, which means that as you test, once you go over a certain amount, they average it over the 4 quarters of the year, and they determine if you're going to exceed the standard for the year. That's when it kicks in, and that's when you've technically had a violation. So that's what we have here. Next slide, please. So we have, as I said, we have 7 different wells, and as you can see, the results are summarized below. The Soons well field is 4 wells. So what you see is that for well 10, when you take those results and you look at the running annual average, that's the 3rd column. We are over the standards for PFOA and PFOS. We have non-detects for PFNA, so that's not an issue. Similarly, when you look at well 9, it looks like we are very close on PFOA. We are not very close on PFOS. We are below the standard. And again, PFNA is not an issue. Similarly, the Soons well field, the 4 wells, they are running below the standards. And for well number 5, we have a PFOA that's trending above the average. And when we get to the 4th quarter, it's very possible we will have an exceedance of that standard after we get the 4th quarter results. PFOS, we do not. PFNA, we get a little bit of a hit there, but again, it appears that this will be well below the running annual average. So as you can see, it doesn't happen overnight, and we've been looking at these, following them, monitoring them, and looking at what we refer to as a corrective action plan for years. And next slide, please. So there are 3 general options for treatment. One is granular activated carbon. Second is ion exchange treatment, which is resin we refer to. And the third one is a high pressure membrane nanofiltration or reverse osmosis. They all have certain benefits. I will say that the last option, nanofiltration or RO, reverse osmosis, generally is considered to be very expensive and cost prohibitive on a wide scale basis. There are RO systems that can be put in for individual homes or individual portions of homes, say the kitchen sink, that can operate, but it would be very unusual for a municipality to look at that type of treatment method on a town-wide basis. So we are left with GAC and ion exchange. We are currently, go ahead, next slide. So granular activated carbon is exactly what it sounds like. It's carbon that has been ground up. It's very absorbent, and effectively it chemically absorbs the contaminants into the carbon. You see these tanks in a lot of places. There's with both types of treatment methods, it's a very good system from one perspective, and that is it doesn't require that you lose the pressure of the system. So you're basically running it through a filter and keeping it at full pressure. There are other types of treatment systems that don't work on PFAAs that they're inexpensive, but they do require a loss of pressure, and then you have to repressurize the system. So you got GAC, the next one. Ion exchange resins, again, they look very similar. It's just a different type of a tank, but again, it's a highly porous material. The chemicals stick to these beads and they get removed, and it works as a filter. Next one. High pressure membranes, RO, it's where you push it, the water through a membrane, and it basically stops the chemicals, but it allows the water to pass. And it is, they're very effective. All three are very effective to remove these contaminants in full compliance with the standards. Next, please. Okay, so the action plan. So the first one, once we were notified that we had this running annual average, it's important that one, you demonstrate that you've retained someone to address the standard, address the requirement. So the borough retained us to design the systems designed, being submitted to DEP, and we're going to get it approved for a quick implementation. We are currently performing quarterly testings of all of the wells. You will very likely see additional violations until such time as the new system is fully up and operational. We're doing currently an analysis of the treatment options, which, as I said earlier, it's likely going to come down to either GAC or resin. Then we submit the design and permitting of the selected treatment option. The actual design is not difficult. It's fairly straightforward. What's important to do is there's the initial capital cost of putting in the system. Then there's the operational cost that needs to be considered as you swap out the media for either one of these two systems. And Oakland, like any other water system, has its own set of unique circumstances. And then you want to be aware of what future regulatory requirements may be enacted, so that you're ahead of the curve. And I say that to give you an example. When it comes to granular activated carbon, just like a sand filter on a pool, sometimes you backwash the system to regenerate it to make it more effective. And that is a fairly straightforward process if you have a sanitary sewer system available. If you do not, then you cannot discharge that water onto the ground. You need to capture it in a tanker truck or a frac tank and have it trucked to a wastewater plant for disposal. Similarly, with the resins, they are the expended media are incinerated. And so you have to look at that disposal method again and look at the cost of doing that. And then there's another facet that involves the licensing of the water operator for the system. You need to evaluate both of these systems individually to determine if they will change the requirement of the operator to operate the water system. We work for multiple water systems, and we have many of them where actually, depending on which treatment system we go to, it will actually require that the licensed water operator that they have is grandfathered, but the next one would require a higher certification to operate the system. So that's also a factor. And then the last factor we look at is to see if new legislation is likely to come due that could affect the operational cost going forward. The review of the design by DEP typically takes 4 months. We implement the construction of the treatment system, and again, we monitor and report the water quality test results to verify the successful treatment implementation. And as we are monitoring that, we are monitoring to make sure we are in compliance with the standards. By that, I mean simply that we have to make sure we're under that 13 and 14 parts per trillion as a public drinking water system. So when we put that media in, there will be a period of time where it will work fine. And then after that, as we run up against the standards, we're going to swap out that media, and we're going to ensure that the removal of the contaminants are in compliance with the standards of the state, which frankly could change a year from now. They could go even more restrictive than they currently are. So again, we are looking at the standards as they're not static. It's a very dynamic situation. We are looking at the potential for new contaminants to come on the list to be added to the 90 that are required. And so we're looking at all of this. The part that we're handling right now is fairly straightforward. As I said, it relates to you have to evaluate the water chemistry. You have to evaluate whether it's an indoor and outdoor system, whether there's room for it on a site, whether there's land use, flood hazard area, wetland issues that are associated with the siting of these systems. But it's a fairly straightforward process that we go through, especially when it's a single well, or even the Soon's well field, 4 wells. It's fairly straightforward. Next slide, please. Everybody on this call, I would respectfully ask them to make a note of this link that you see before you relating to PFAS. It's really a very good document. It gives you the DEP perspective of what the logic was when they did it, when they regulated these contaminants, why they did it, how they're doing it. And as they come at it, they talk about whenever the DEP looks at a standard, they make a judgment, and they identify if something is what they refer to is an acute contaminant or not. And if it is considered an acute contaminant, or if the levels are so high to warrant specific concern, that either a water system sometimes will voluntarily shut down, as we have numerous, when there's much higher levels involved. We do have numerous other clients that do shut down their wells on a voluntary basis, and the DEP could also order it. In the case of Oakland, none of that's happening. In fact, the levels that we're seeing are similar to, and in many cases lower than, many of the water systems that are currently still operating. So I do strongly recommend that you take a look at that link to get a better idea. But again, you can also refer to the US EPA, US State Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Borough of Oakland's website for just an outline of our public works and water utility. Next slide, please. So questions, as we go into this, I would just like to note that as I looked at all of the other states that regulate these contaminants, the lowest being California with 5.1. And then they, as I said, we're the fifth highest in the country. It's really important that you understand that these are all newly regulated contaminants. It's not that they're new contaminants. They've been in our water systems and many water systems for, we suspect, decades. I would also say that when you look at a bottled water source, the bottled water is regulated not as a public drinking water requirement where testing is quarterly, and there are 90 compounds that are being regulated. PFOAs, PFOSs are not regulated in drinking, bottled water. It's regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. It's a whole different standard. There are many different stories about how when you test, you're supposed to use sterile water as a control blank when you submit distilled water, when you submit it to a lab to make sure that your methods are consistent. And there are many stories about how somebody inadvertently took the water cooler water, put it in, and got crazy readings on the blank, which led to crazy readings on the entire batch of data, because between what you see in a bottled water system with, they're washing out the bottles, there's a residual from the soap and everything else. It's very unusual. It's not unusual at all to see these bottled water systems fail miserably on what public drinking water standards would be. So I thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, so if the public has any questions, please click the raise your hand icon and you will be acknowledged and unmuted to ask your question. Thank you. Okay, first up, we have resident Steve P.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, Steve Panosian, 69 Glen Gray. Kevin, thank you for your overview. I have a simple question. I'm on well water, and we do have ours tested every so often, and it sounds like we have to have it tested again. Would you recommend, or does anybody have a recommendation on where or who I should contact to get the right test done?
Sure, I will. Steve, what I'll do is I'll go to our, I'll publish something on the borough website. How's that? Because I think what you're asking is exactly the right question. And I can give you the recommended protocol. I'll give you a list of several different labs, and you can do it yourself and you can send it in. It's very straightforward, but excellent question.
Okay, next up, we have William Sisti.
Yes, I have a question. I'm sure everything you're going to do is going to solve the problem. Is there any indication on where this chemical came from? Upriver in Suffern, contaminants deposited in someone's business system? Where does it come from? It's not like arsenic where it could be naturally occurring. Any thought given to that? Thank you.
Another good question. At these levels, Mr. Sisti, we will certainly take a look and try to identify a source. We will also look at we'll do an environmental search, a query of nearby sites to see if they may have it. It's very difficult to identify what's referred to as a responsible party under these circumstances. The genesis of this legislation stems from a southern New Jersey town having levels in the tens of thousands of parts per trillion, adjacent to a firm that made firefighting foam. You can figure out who that might be, but they wanted to be able to go after them to be able to claim damages, and it was an unregulated contaminant in the state of New Jersey. So they actually adopted, in part, these regulations so that these towns surrounding this factory could go get them. We have seen cases where there was a cause and effect, and the one that comes to mind actually happened to Waldwick. There was a fire on Hopper Avenue, and we have pre-fire levels and post-fire levels, and they used a lot of firefighting foam to extinguish the fire. And there we have something that we're looking at options to go after the responsible party. New Jersey has something called the Spill Act, New Jersey Spill Act. And what it says is that if you can identify a party within 3 years and file a lawsuit, that you have the benefit of treble damages should you prevail and that party not be willing to enter into some sort of negotiation. We've had successful experience prosecuting, doing the engineering side of prosecuting a spill fund claim. And it was difficult, it was drawn out, but if we will turn our attention towards potential, they call them PRPs, potential responsible parties, as soon as we get this system up and operating back in conformance with the current standards.
Okay, next up we have Katrine Beck. Please state your name and address.
Hi, good evening. Katrine Beck, 8 Chapel Hill. Mr. Boswell, thank you for the overview that you provided. I have a two-part question. Given the fact that well 10 is now above the standard and it appears well 5 and others may also test above the standard, does that mean that these chemicals impact all of the water for Oakland? And my second question is, who's going to pay for what you described as the cure as to whichever plan the mayor and council decide to implement?
Good evening, Ms. Beck. There are 6 water tanks in town, and there is a certain amount of blending that goes on where there are booster stations that pump water from low-lying areas up into higher elevation zones. That's exactly what happens with 10. 10 is down towards Portobello's on the south end of town. So while that water would tend to be in that area, it doesn't necessarily stay that way. It gets moved around quite a bit. So the straight answer to your question is, generally it stays in that area, but there's no real zone that just says it gets well 10 water. It's not unusual to, let's say, take a well out of service in order to do routine maintenance, or there gets struck by lightning or something, and then more water would tend to go from one part of the town to another. Your second question, what was that again? I'm sorry.
As to the cost, what it would cost to cure it, who pays for it?
And who pays for it? As far as who pays it right now, it would be the users. It's something that the state has come up with, these new standards. I can tell you that Suez is putting in a resin system on Wyandotte Trail in Franklin Lakes. That's going to treat 2 wells that they operate there, one on High Mountain Road, one on Wyandotte. Ratepayers are paying there. Walwick is putting in a system, multiple systems on their wells. Garfield's putting in systems. Mawa is looking at systems right now. Hawthorne is putting in systems. We have Hohokus, Allendale. They're all being paid for by the ratepayers. We are, of course, looking at available grants. The reality is that we have a 1-year requirement to bring this into compliance. The Federal Infrastructure Act that was just passed includes a line item for PFAA initiatives that will not get here in time to come anywhere close to meeting the timeline that we need to get to. As far as the estimate goes, we're working that up now. We will have it shortly. I would say within the next 2 weeks.
Next up, we have resident Vivian Steinmetz.
Good evening. I have actually 3 questions. The first one is the remediation that's proposed or whichever one is chosen, will that just address well 10, or will it address the potential for any of the other wells to be contaminated at another point in time, or do we have to then go through this process every time there's a contamination? That's my first question.
You want me to answer that, Kevin?
Why don't you ask all the questions?
Okay. The second one is, are there any recommendations for in-house systems that I know some of the filtration systems, like I have a Britasil system, et cetera, it does not remove this. Do we have a list of systems that we could purchase, either tabletop, faucet, under sink type systems, if we wanted to do something within our home? Do you have a list of things that we could actually use as a starting point for research on what we wanted to do? And the third question is actually my husband's question. Go ahead.
Yeah, if I understand this, the source of this may be this firefighting foam. And my question is, every time there's a truck fire on 287, is our fire department or other fire departments spreading this foam on the accident site? And then it's eventually going to drain into our storm drains and pollute our wells.
That's the question, is if could be firefighting foam. Is that the question?
Yeah, and then shouldn't some other agency be responsible for this? Because they're putting it down and it winds up, I understand they have to fight the fire, but you have to understand, where's that foam going to go? It's going to go wash down into the storm drains and pollute our wells. I mean, that's a given. I don't think you can deny that.
I'm not trying to deny anything. As far as question number 1, remediation proposed, that's an excellent question. There were 7 wells, and but they enter the water system at 4 locations. Okay, so there are 4 points of the entry. So when we look at these treatment systems, it occurs at the point of entry. So you look at whether or not you can link one well to another well by what we refer to as a raw water line, and then enter at that point, or you go like we have the Soons well field, you have 4 wells, but 1 point of entry. So right now, it looks like we have a maximum of 4 treatment systems we would need to put in. The size and the cost of those treatment systems is dependent upon the flow rate and, of course, the contamination level at each location. But if there is an economy of scale to be gained by linking one to another, we also look at that. There is a town nearby that has a very unique water system, and that is Fairlawn. Fairlawn has a very high PFOA issue, by the way, but they also have they've reduced the numbers of points of entry by having raw water lines run throughout the borough. And they're actually doing a pilot program for it's either the DEP or the US EPA. But their levels are, I won't quote levels, but they're much, much higher than we're talking here. They're at least 5 or 10 times higher than everything we're talking about here. So
And if I
they
just
have-
may interrupt, right now we're only looking at treatment for 3. The Soons well field, which contains 4 wells, is way below the limit. So right now we're only looking at 5, 9, and 10 for treatment.
Thank you. And the person speaking is Giselle Diaz. She's our head of our water wastewater division. As far as the second question relating to in-house systems, there are in-house systems. And the best resource to get that information, frankly, is the Bergen County Health Department. We can certainly say that there are reverse osmosis systems that are whole house. They're at the kitchen tap. There are GAC filter systems. But rather than me just talk about it here or provide you information that could lead you to make a purchase decision, I really think you should get it from the Department of Health. Try them as a first resort. I'm happy to speak with you afterwards, but they're the best place to start. As far as firefighting foam goes, we are certainly looking at the current materials being used in firefighting technologies.
Yeah,
It is
Kevin?
true.
Sorry,
I'm
I'm sorry, I can address that. Actually, a couple of years ago, I had a conversation with the then fire chief about our use of firefighting foam when this first started to become an issue that was brought to our attention, that it was something that was going to be regulated. It was a compound of concern. And so the Oakland Fire Department, from what the fire chief had told me, has moved away from a firefighting foam that has PFOAs in it. Apparently the industry has developed alternatives and we're using that. So our firefighting foam, from what I'm told, no longer has PFOAs in it.
And I think that answers both your third and fourth question. So thank you.
Next up is resident John Morris.
Hi, Kevin, thank you very much for the presentation and for the information. I'm at 28 Lehigh Way. And the industrial park is upgrading, at least from well 10, and probably upgrading it from the other wells too. Do you think it would make sense to put some effort into looking at current and past operations there to see whether or not a source from the industrial park may be responsible for what we're seeing in our wells, and hence an entity that may help us pay for it?
Yes, I think the logical place to start is to do a data search of the NJDEP database. And I think you should look at not just the Oakland, the industrial park, but I think you should look at every industrial site that may be in the area. You don't know what you're going to find, and that's the most cost-effective way to determine what's there. But you bring up a very good point. As we know, there were some discharges because they're all on septic. So we know they're all on septic in the park. So it wouldn't be the first time that we found something there, but you start with the data search.
Okay, next up is resident Lou Ficara.
Hi, Lou Ficara, 4 Cardinal Drive. So one question is it possible, given that there are some concerns out there, we're not exactly sure what the impact may be, there may be some residents that are feeling a little uneasy. Is it possible to shut off the offending wells until, these systems are up and running? It sounds like that, I don't know, from this presentation, it sounds like maybe they'll be up and running within a year from now.
They will be up and running in a I want to say a year if we didn't have supply chain issues. They'll be running as quickly as we could get them. I could tell you what we're going to be recommending, and that is that as soon as we identify the technology to be used. We're going to go back to Mr. Coons, who's a very knowledgeable procurement person in terms of following the standards for procuring, expending public dollars for procuring these systems. And we're going to try to expedite the securing them, just putting them on the line so that they're not going to be delayed. It's important because, frankly, there's a run on these systems. This legislation is affecting a lot of municipally owned systems, as well as, Suez, New Jersey, American Water. It's, you just heard Allendale sold their water system. Suez is going to come in and do these systems on the old Allendale wells. So yes, we're expediting all of that to make it happen as quickly as possible. As far as shutting down the wells, what happens is that it's a balancing act. Oakland is a borough that operates. Its water allocation permit is more than ample for its own needs. In fact, there are times when you're going to be selling water to Franklin Lakes when they have problems meeting their demand at certain times of the year. When you shut down a well, what can happen, the unintended consequences is you could actually find yourself with not enough water and you have to go become a purchaser of water from outside systems. Not only does that affect your cost of your operating of your utility, but it could also indirectly result in a connection ban for new construction in your town. And that's happened. It's happened very close to here. It's just being lifted after a couple of years because there were very high levels of PFOAs in a nearby water system that they took out so much of their percentage of their water production that DEP actually came in and instituted a connection ban. And those were for much higher levels of contaminants. So
I'm sorry, Kevin, purchasing water from neighboring towns who have the same issue. So
that's true too.
Yes, so we have levels that I haven't actually seen anyone that we deal with that the DEP has told them to shut down their wells. This is not a do not drink order. So I don't think, even people who have voluntarily shut down wells have probably levels 6 times as high as we do, 5 to 6 times as high, and they did it voluntarily. So DP hasn't told us to shut down our wells, and Well 10 is actually one of our biggest producers. So we would not be able to meet the demands without it.
And I could tell you, we're currently operating other water systems that have higher levels than we're talking about here. Next question.
Next up is resident Emily Schultz.
Hi, thank you very much for this presentation, but I was hoping that perhaps you could expand on your a previous answer that you gave with respect to in-house systems to remediate this situation. Rather than just telling us to go contact the Bergen County Health Department, can you be a little more specific in terms of whether there are answers on the health department site? What position within the health department do we go to? I mean, that's a pretty general answer. So could you please expand?
I think it's possible, Rich, if we could, we'll find a link for them and we could put up on the website. That's probably the easiest way to do it.
Absolutely.
Part of the problem, Ms. Schultz, is I could tell you that a full house or a partial house reverse osmosis system works, but there are so many disparities in granular activated carbon systems that you can't just say it here. It's a very there's such a wide disparity of how effective they are to treat. So we'll do it on the link as you suggested.
Next up is resident Sarah Kim.
Okay. Hello, hi, 2800 Run, Sarah Kim. General question related to the ones that were raised previously. It's more of like a concern of what do we do now for drinking water? If we are to still keep on purchasing drinking water, or is there a filterization out there that we could rely on for drinking water?
You could see that, you know, it's not a do not drink, so you're able to continue to drink the water.
And again, the link we referred to earlier in the program on the PowerPoint, that gives you some guidance as to, again, they don't consider these contaminants an acute contaminant. In fact, you comply with the federal standard. You know, it goes back to an adage that we've done this presentation now in 6 different towns. And one of the speakers, one of the residents got up, and the analogy he used that night was, how many times have you picked up a product and read on it that this product contains something that in the state of California has been determined to cause cancer, and you put it back on the shelf because in California it's deemed to cause cancer. We are talking about something that New Jersey has the 6th highest in the country. So that in 44 other states, you would not be seeing that this water that the borough has exceeds those standards. So we have to do what the state tells us we have to do, and that is to operate the water system in compliance. So that's we're doing.
Okay, next up is resident William Sisti.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Earlier question I had about possible where it came from, and the fire foam thing came up. Where else is this chemical used in industry? I mean, some of my light reading is the original Teflon, but there are no Teflon manufacturers in the area, not that I'm aware of. But what's the industrial use of this chemical?
It's in
If you can answer
clothing, carpet,
Yeah.
right, fabric. It's not made anymore, but it's since it's the forever chemical, it was in, you know, for 70 years, it was in plenty of things. Dental floss.
It was when you used to spray your kids' clothes before when they went to school, you know, to make them waterproof. The shoes, the boots, and Scotch Guard, and those types of things all were part of it. It's in, as we said, it's in dental floss. It's in packaging. It's in general packaging. And then what happens is, because it goes in and it ends up in like a wastewater treatment plant, or it ends up in the waste stream of a municipal landfill, then from the sludge of a municipal from a sanitary treatment plant, wherever that gets dumped, that becomes a new source of contamination because it doesn't go away. A municipal landfill, what's put there, the leachate from a municipal landfill, if it's not properly capped, sealed, and operated, that becomes a separate contamination source. So it's something that, you know, there are many different ways for it to get into the system. Next question.
Next up is Katrine Beck.
Hi, 8 Chapel Hill. Ms. Diaz, I think I don't have the communication in front of me, but the way it read and my gist of it was that while it did not say do not drink, it did have a lot of disclaimers that if you're at risk or what have you, this is a problem and you can't boil it away. So I don't
You
think
cannot
it's,
boil it away. That's why we're going to treat for it. I mean, if anyone is immune compromised, I would recommend talking to your doctor about it. But like the website that Kevin had pointed out has a lot of really good information on it.
I get that and I appreciate it, but I don't think we should undermine that.
No, that's why we're treating
This is
for
a
it.
concern, right? And
No,
whatever,
of course. Yeah, it's
whatever the
we all have
standards are, they are the standards, and I'd hope to be above the standards, not below it. So that's a moot point as far as, whether it's safe or not. It's been shown that it's not, but, I can't help but to think about the sewer situation that we have going on. If well 10 only impacts certain residents and everybody, the water users, everybody's going to bear the cost of this. That's similar to what's happening with the sewer people who are impacted by failing sewers, except only the sewer users have to bear the cost. So when you said water users, Mr. Boswell, you're talking about everybody here pays a water bill, now has to pay to bear the cost and the cure for this, correct?
Yes.
Right, even though, not everybody in town is impacted by well 10, and certainly the folks that are using well 10 had nothing to do with how that well was maintained or how that stuff got into the water. So my point to the council and the people who are on this Zoom who have dealt with the sewer issue, it seems to me to be quite parallel that when we have one issue in town that impacts one resident, it impacts all of us. So when the water impacts,
though, well 10 and well 5 and well 9, all of them, like Kevin said before, it feeds. So even though it's a zone 1, zone 1 does feed the higher zones. So actually your whole system is blended. So it's not, it doesn't, you can't say well 10 feeds a certain, it's located in the southern portion of the borough, but it actually feeds water throughout the entire borough.
Okay, so then you should tell the water department to not tell people, oh, don't worry about it. Well 10 is only on Spruce Street and it doesn't go on one side or the other. If the water impacts the entire town and the entire town has to bear the cost, and I'm happy to do that because safe drinking water is a priority, then I only just appeal to the mayor and council that the same parallel can be drawn with the sewer folks who had nothing to do with the failing septics that we have to deal with, which may actually be part of this. I don't know, but I just.
Ms. Beck, may I just go back, and I understand your point, but earlier in this presentation, you asked me if well 10 is specific to a certain part of town, and my answer was no. So well 10 is part of the water system for the borough. I understand the analogy between the sewer systems. They have a specified service area, which is not the whole town. This is, and with the exception of like Glen Gray and stuff where there's some private wells, this is the central water system with 72 miles of pipeline. That well 10 is a production well 4.
Thank you. No, I understand that. What I am taking away from this is that a lot of this is interconnected. The industry that uses septic that could have seepage could now be impacting certain things. Well 10 could be impacting, and mixing with water for the rest of the town. My point being, Mr. Boswell, that, when the sewer users were told your issue and your failing septic that you had no control over is your issue, it seems like it's not. And what we've been saying all along is this is a town-wide issue and everyone should be on board in fixing the issues for everybody, just not for a certain sect of the residents. Thank you.
Okay, next up we have Miss Cortez.
Hi, this is actually Matthew, Ms. Cortez's husband. How are you? I wanted to ask first about the location of the Soons wells. Are those feeding? Those the ones that feed the reserve? Or
all of the
like a
all of the
majority.
wells feed 6 tanks, and those 6 tanks work their way around. Yes, the Soons wells are located in the northerly portion of the town, but again, there is no spot in the borough where one well or group of wells serves only one area. Doesn't
Correct.
happen like that.
Right. So my only concern, I think, was that I mean, I've done some research since getting the notice. I knew PFOAs were dangerous to a degree, like accumulated over time type thing, where, like, you know, the more you ingest or are exposed to for longer periods of time can cause, you know, a myriad of problems. That's why you want to sort of limit the amount that you're exposed to over your lifetime. But so some scientists believe that even 1 part per trillion is too much. I mean, the EPA obviously setting a limit of 70 parts per trillion just seems astronomically high comparatively, but you know, given that there is concern, I mean, how well, so first of all, how well do these 2 proposed treatment options, how low do they get the numbers? Would it end up being below 1 part per trillion? So that's, I guess, part one. And then given the fact that even the Soons wells and, you know, basically other parts of our entire water system have even above 1 part per trillion, wouldn't it be prudent to remediate all of the wells so that we get to that safe level for all of the residents?
So under 2 is considered non-detect right now. Believe it or not, just a couple of years ago, there wasn't any labs that could read under 20. So as the technology gets better, we could, you know, reach the limits. That's why Kevin said, you know, it's a moving target. Sometimes we don't know, you know, in, you know, a couple of years that they may lower that 13 and 14. So our design will go down to non-detect.
Okay.
That's our goal.
But you need to understand, though, that as you operate the system, you need to swap out the media, and the media is costly. So after, let's just say we believe that the media will last 6 months, in order to get, and that will keep you operating below 10 parts per trillion or 11 parts per trillion. To operate it at 1 or 2 parts per trillion would mean you'd be swapping out this media on a monthly basis. And the cost would be obviously significantly higher than it would be as we're operating to these regulatory standards. So I think your question, Matthew, was, can we do it? The answer is yes, but it's significantly more expense. And as far as the second part of your question goes to, can we put it on the Soons well field even though it's under? The answer is yes, if that is a policy decision that is made. But again, there are significant financial consequences with that decision. So generally, I can tell you that, like I said, we operate many different water systems, as you know, they're engineer, they're consultant, and our job typically is to ensure that we meet or exceed the standards. This would be a precedent if we were going to exceed the standard by a factor of 7, 8, or 10. There aren't any of our clients that give us that type of directive when we design the water systems.
Mr. Cortez, and it's not just we install this, we actually still have to follow the DEP standards for sampling. So it's not like we install treatment and don't test on it. So we will continue to test the water system to make sure it meets all the DEP standards.
And all those results are public. They're all
Correct.
They're all on the DEP website, so you can look at them, quarterly websites. So the reporting is very, very much an open book.
So one more thing then. You mentioned the reverse osmosis system being possibly cost prohibitive, but would that be a better choice in the long run for like 20 years from now, 30 years from now, like being a system that ends up being less expensive in the long run with a higher initial outward cost?
It's also got a very expensive operating cost as well, and it has the similar situation of the swapping out, effectively changing and maintaining the system. The operating cost of an RO system is significantly higher. All of the treatment technologies are capable of meeting those standards. It's just that that is generally in a far less volumetric type of thing, because think about it, you're using water to fill your pool, to water your lawn, and we're talking about taking these to almost sterile conditions when you get down to the levels that we're discussing here. So it would be a very, very expensive undertaking to meet the standards that you're referring to.
Next up is resident Michael Miner.
Thank you. Mike Miner, 53 Hiawatha Boulevard, licensed professional engineer, and also a practitioner in water treatment and remediation for almost 30 years, including PFOS. First, I just want to compliment Boswell and the town in this presentation. It's been very informative, the level of detail that you provided for a very complex topic. It's above my expectations. I was happy to hear that reverse osmosis is actually being screened out. It's really not appropriate for what we're looking at, and carbon and ion exchange are exactly the two technologies we should be looking at. All situations are not the same. It really takes a close look for our need here in Oakland. As a comment, I'm sure you're doing this already, but please make sure you look closely at the pre-filtration needs for both technologies. Ion exchange will remove more than just PFOS, carbon and ion exchange, because they're packed beds. Those of us that live in Oakland are very familiar with the hardness of the water and the minerals that come out in our plumbing. Those minerals can come out anywhere. It depends on where the geochemistry shifts. And if they come out in the beds will exhaust prematurely, and that's a life cycle cost consideration. So it's very important that be closely looked at. On the backside, I'm sure you're also looking at the sustainability. Kevin, you mentioned how the ion exchange resin is disposed of currently, or at least in one way, being incineration. It's not cheap. I am hearing in the industry that there may be suppliers of carbon that have found a way to regenerate it, which is a sustainable way of dealing with it. It's not waste disposal. They're basically treating it so it can be reused again. And to confirm what you've presented, and this is my direct experience, both technologies that we're looking at can remove PFOS to non-detectable concentrations based on the current methods that we're using. So again, I just wanted to thank you for this presentation. It's very informative, and good luck. It's a very challenging situation. There's so much that's changing, and what you've touched on as far as the broad-based thinking that you're doing to anticipate where it might go, it's very much appropriate in the evaluation you're doing right now. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. And just to pick up on what he just said about the sustainability factor, when we look at the incineration, we look at the lack of the green solution that is, and then we look at the regeneration of the carbon, and we're hearing that, we're cautiously optimistic that that's a way to go, because the next thing that's going to happen is, if you think about this, as large of a problem as it seems for us now take this problem going to the wastewater treatment plants, and that they have to now treat for it. So, you know, it's you have to connect a lot of different moving parts, and Mr. Minor's right that you really need to look at where you see the industry going in terms of regulatory standards and new things that are coming down the pike, and we're that's you know, we there's a lot involved, and thank you.
Yep.
Next up is resident Monica D.
Charlie Dimple, 10 Conestoga Court. I just want to make more of a general statement rather than have a question. And this is more for the council. When it comes to some of us, as Ms. Beck had mentioned, are kind of getting a double hit here when it comes to the well along with the water. Any systems we're going to be putting into our homes are going to be coming at a cost as well. I would just hope if we've not done so, that we are looking at future capital reserve studies. The fact that all these are being given to us in the form of taxpayers are responsible for this, well users are responsible for this, people who use the water are responsible for this. We put a certain amount of faith in you all to be able to tell us when infrastructure is going to in the future need to be replaced. Part of the messaging that has come out of this is it has failed or it has currently gone bad. I think if we had a little bit more insight to know that in the next 5 or 7 years, something is going to have to be replaced, the burden to the taxpayers would be a little bit less harsh, as we're all seeing right now. I understand having to pay, but then at the same point, when we also get hit this year with information that all of our homes are going to be reassessed for the value on top of this, we just got hit with 3 things in less than a year. I think that's a tough pill to swallow. Again, I understand infrastructure is going to go ahead and fail. However, I don't think that we need to be told that it has failed. We need to be told in advance that we need to go ahead and take care of this. So it's just a little point that I'd like to make to everybody, that if there's a way for us to get out in front of this in the future so that we're not getting hit with all this at the same time, I think would be a lot easier message and pill for all of us to swallow. Thank you.
Next up is Nick DeRoda.
Hi, Nick DeRoda, 57 Walnut. Just wondering if there would be any point that we should consider having private industry run our water system. So there are more rate payers to distribute these costs amongst. You said that Allendale has sold off their water system, or maybe, don't know if they sold it off or sold off the management of it or the maintenance of it. When does a borough start looking at options like this to help their residents as far as costs go?
Rich, you want to start with this, and then I'll
go ahead, Ken.
Okay, so the question you're asking is part an actuarial financial one, and part just how well you manage your system on a short, intermediate, and long-term basis. And I didn't answer the last gentleman who spoke, but there's something called an asset management plan. There's a required thing that the borough has to do as part of operating its water system. And when you do that, it's really giving yourself a report card to see whether you're keeping up, you're falling behind, you're well ahead of the curve, or you're in a downward spiral that you're really not going to get out of. And I can tell you that, and it's public document and everything else, so you're more than welcome to take a look at it. And the short answer on the Oakland water system is you're keeping up, okay? And that's a very good report card, if you will. There are always challenges that you need to keep up with. I always get the question, when are we going to stop paying money for this utility system? And the answer is never. It's a utility system. It's like putting gas in your car. You're always going to be putting gas in your car or charging your electric car. If you go to the route of a sale to a utility, what's going to happen is your rates will go up. There are many towns that have gone that route. Allendale just voted to do it in the last election. And they have some debt that they're going to retire with that. They have another $5 or $6 million that they're going to spend on the PFAS, and they're going to have to bring their wells into compliance because they're behind on some of the wells being maintained there. And Suez is more than happy to do it, because for Suez, it's not about spreading it out over the denominator of the 300,000+ people. It's merely how much is spent, how much they can charge, how much they can make a profit on, and how much they kick back. And the people that benefit from that are the people that have the failing report card. Okay, the West Milfords who had a lot of debt and had no way out financially benefited from that type of a model. The people with a good report card and a good water system are going to be the people that end up subsidizing those other water systems. And for instance, you're probably producing, and we can figure out the number, you're probably producing 1 million gallons of water, somewhere south of $2,000 a million gallons. My guess is it's between $1,500 and $2,000 a million gallons. The cost of United Water to buy is over $5,000 a million gallons. It's about $5,600 a million gallons. In New Jersey American Water is about $6,000 a million gallons. Passaic Valley Sewerage Water Commission, is $2,900 a million gallons. So when you work in the industry, you know how much all of these different water systems are charging. And they frankly don't really have, if there's a new regulation, there's no reason why they just don't go out and spend the money, because once the BPU approves it, it means they can put it on your bill. So while you talk about, benefiting, United Water just spent $60 million replacing all the lead services. So if you sold to Suez. So if you were to connect to another system like that, New Jersey American Water or Suez, that just spent $60 million, you're going to be part of the customers that are subsidizing that initiative. So it's a very complicated thing, but the short takeaway is that if you have a good source of water, and you have this newly regulated contaminant that you're going to have to address. And then after that, you're going to have to just continue to operate your water system. You're always going to have your water mains breaking. You're always going to have your tanks and whatnot needing maintenance. But in general, your water system is an excellent water system. And if you were to go the route of selling, you will end up getting the bill for these failing report card water systems. And, we know who they are. We know that Lodi did it, Wallington did it, Allendale is now doing it. Bayonne did it, and all they had was a central system. They had no wells. Hoboken did it. They took the money, and now they're bonding all the money that they should have reinvested back into their system. So it's a separate discussion. It's a long discussion, but please understand that your situation is not like a lot of these municipalities that are selling their water systems now. You have a very good system.
Next up is resident Sarah Michelle.
Hi, good evening. Sarah Michelle, 23 Cayuga Avenue. I have a question for Mr. Boswell and also a statement to consider for the mayor and council. Mr. Boswell, if and when has the RFP or request for proposal, has that gone out yet for remediation?
What do you mean by RFP?
Just a proposal, I guess, to contractors to come and take care of our situation with the water. Has that gone out yet?
Oh, no. Once we identify the technology, we design the system, and it's more piping than anything else, and how you set everything on the pad. And then we get the permit for it, and then we publicly bid it. So no, that hasn't gone out. It'll be a public bid.
So this is a very early, so this is basically just a notification to the residents of what's happening, and we're very early in the process,
You're
correct?
about, I would say you're 7 months to 8 months away from bidding at the max, and 7 months away from bidding it.
Okay. I don't know. That's hard to hear, because when it comes to the sewers, we've heard that there will be public bidding for that as well. And I'm not sure where we are with the process of that. And that was a couple years ago when I moved into the house in 2018. Have we gone into public bidding for the sewer lines, or is that still the case? Like, we're still waiting for the next phase?
Sewer line was out to bid. There was an addendum. It was actually, bids were supposed to be received tomorrow. There was an addendum that was requested 14 days ago. We went to the iBank, who was funding that, and they got back to us today they approved it last night. They got back to us today to say, we want you to extend the bid date. So we're actually having to re-advertise and extend the bid date.
Okay.
So yes, it is out to bid, but you bring up a good point. When you go through the iBank, it takes a lot longer. We're not going through the iBank on this. So that's a big distinction, and it's a good comment, because that's probably a year of delay.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. So that's why I brought it up. And then I have just a general statement for the mayor and council, because as Ms. Katrine Beck just made us all aware, if you weren't already aware of the sewer situation in Oakland, we've gone back and forth and, tried to convey how important it is that our wastewater sewer systems in Oakland, for the 200 plus residents, it doesn't just affect us. The water gets treated, and then the water seeps back into our lakes. So there's a whole cycle of our water, right? Just like with well number 10, you're saying it's all interconnected. We have to connect all the moving parts, and that includes all the wastewater, correct? And so I think we have to really take a step back and understand wastewater, water, the well number 10, it affects all of the residents. It's all environmental factors. And so by that logic, I don't see how we could say well number 10 and the water issue, that the entire town and all residents should be pitching in and paying for remediation. And then we categorize sewers separately, when in fact the town was, fined 500 grand. The town was, not the 200 residents on sewers. And so it's important to remember the waters and sewers are all interconnected. Our water affects the rest of the town. It goes back into our lakes, and it, eventually comes back to us. It goes back to the Ramapo River, which is a category 1 classified water. It should be protected, right? That's the highest form. And so I think my point here to the mayor and council is to understand that the same point that Ms. Katrine Beck made earlier, that the water affects us all in Oakland, the sewers do too, and it's all interconnected. I mean, Mr. Boswell, you said it yourself. You said we have to connect all the moving parts here. And that's just my statement for the evening, and I hope all is well.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions? If there are, please click the raise your hand icon. Okay, Mayor, I see no further comments or questions.
All right, I just want to tell everyone that if there are questions, sometimes people don't like to ask questions, in front of a forum. You're always welcome to email me. I can forward all questions over to Kevin Boswell and to Giselle. They're the professionals. They will give you the exact answers that I may not be able to give you, but I could always forward the information. So please feel free to contact us. Go to the website. Giselle said maybe we'll put the link. Giselle, you said we'll put the link on the website for the County Board of Health. And any questions about homes with your individual processes, just email me. You'll get an answer. And with that, I thank everybody for coming. And welcome to hear from you. And don't forget, we have a council meeting tomorrow night. You could still ask more questions. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.